I find it to be just a little bit ironic that I'm planning to cut my internet for a minimum of 2 months, and maybe just 2 months, and then come back, in midsummer or later. But I did make that decision a few weeks ago, and there's a little bit of risk involved in that because my car needs to be working at all times to get to town. To if I do that, to have any communication with the world, I got to be able to make it back down to town. So, and I'm doing that at a time in which we have received these announcements about strikes on Syria and Israel entering the picture, and a major announcement from Trump in the coming days. And this comes after the recent show of force between China and Russia maneuvering itself to join China in the South China Sea, and so many other developments. The release of a new Satan II missile, and then the YouTube demonetization. So if we actually start talking about these issues or other issues that contain the buzzwords, we can find problems on our channel. And that's the first warning sign. The first warning sign is demonetization. As for myself, I'm now slipping below 200 a month. It seems to be falling faster. It's like a replay of last year. It's like we're having this Groundhog Day for those that weren't around last year and were born in the last 12 months or are new to the current developments in America. In April of 2017, many YouTubers saw the loss of their AdSense. For some, it's rebounded, but not like it was. And a lot of this came with a lot of videos being demonetized that were some of our more widely viewed videos. Some of my relationship videos, for example, may have had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of views, which is small, right? But, when it's a few dollars a month in contributing to the larger pool of videos making up the total monthly AdSense, a few videos making a few dollars per month really means something. And so when they basically kick that box out from under the content creator that is capable of generating revenue, by demonetizing those videos, it reduces the revenue in a big way. So, how do you go on covering some of the current developments when even discussing those things could bring trouble upon our channels in the future? YouTube demonetization is the first level, warnings of a purge, but really it's about setting up that AI system to identify and flag those channels that could be reported on the truth in the future regarding major world events. See, a lot of these things seem to be trial runs. See which ones are going to be those questioning the official stories. And so we have these manufactured events and the way people report on them, and that basically being the #1 way to entrap one's channel. I mean, whether or not we happen to agree with their particular angle. We're more or less talking about how channels that go in a certain direction are getting shot down in flames, as we literally see headlines about Russia warning U.S. jets in similar fashion if they were to get involved in Syria, and back and forth and vice versa. The war of the words, and it's building. And so now we're moving into this zone of time between now and the 2020s for something to kick off that will lead to a hot war, where it's no longer a war of words. And we've seen a number of panics, which may have just simply been more of this trial run, more of this prepping, when in reality they're not really preparing to light the dynamite yet. That will lead to an escalation of these events between these nations. We're still seeing a buildup of these events. And to some people, they're just tuning out. As for myself, it's a matter of going the distance for the long term. And what that also means is I need to be creating more content. And even if there's an event at YouTube headquarters, and even if there's an event in Syria, and even if there's an event over here, that doesn't necessarily have to have my #1 attention as that event unfolds. So I find it interesting that I'm planning to take a pause from the internet in order to try to get more videos produced and uploaded. And I need to do everything in my power to improve things even though lately more videos have been demonetized talking about current events. So there needs to be more work and effort on this channel just to make literally something talking about something that isn't going to result in the channel being flagged. As for the Patreon page and my on-demand, it's difficult for people to contribute if they don't have anything to contribute, so I understand. But for those that do, I don't see YouTube as the platform to be discussing these issues. And it may be beyond the point of there being any point for some of us to even continue discussing those issues if we're struggling that much. So I don't know how I'm going to fare through this in the next month to 2 months. And if the YouTube AdSense system is going to improve for me. But there are ways of starving someone out of even being involved at all when it gets that bad. And the Patreon page needs to grow by 2/3 for that to be sustaining, even as low as I've gotten my bills. This is concerning because I think I should be reporting on this full time and everything that I've looked at over the years. But right now, instead of reporting on it full time, it looks like I'm potentially going in the other direction. And I'm going to be focusing maybe on a rewrite of the solar flare presentation and maybe write by hand a lot of my projections that I see coming about in the United States during wartime. And that's the most important thing that we need to be looking at right now. We're seeing these build-up events, and people still don't seem to get it. I don't think they understand or want to believe that Russia, China, and the United States would work together covertly. You know, those that really control those nations to spark a war that they would use to depopulate their planet, to turn their people, their nations against each other, while still maintaining rulership, and still expanding the space programs and the cooperation in space between the superstate nations so they can get that agenda across. And then start taking people off-world at some point after the outbreak of war. And that seems to be the agenda. And how many people would resist if given the opportunity to go off-planet? So I will continue. But these are also times in which I'm not going to be glued to the newswire. I'm going to glance at the newswire, but I'm not actually going through and watching all of those videos regarding Syria and regarding what this YouTuber is saying. I'm not even clicking. You know, it's happening at a moment to where we had a geomagnetic storm last year, and I wrote a blog in 2013 that still people, I think, consider fringe. And it's the idea of manufactured events and false events during geomagnetic storms, because they know how the human body responds on a hormonal level to world events. And I think events like 9/11 demonstrate that. Other events or periods in which there was a rise in protests and it seemed to fizzle out or end up very controlled. Things like Occupy, one can even say the Tea Party, and other things like that during the last solar cycle or solar peak. Now we're heading towards the solar minimum. And so when I look at the geomagnetic storm of last night and this anxiety about Trump and this speech in which many people anticipate to be a more aggressive vocal stance against, for example, Russia and the announcement of Russia being the enemy. And I think a lot of people are confused about this, and I'm not confused about this. I saw him as someone placed in power as I spoke on an interview. As I talked about Trump being selected, I talked about this scenario. And I even felt that the whole, he's friends with Russia was a distraction from, well, sure, but only to the point where they're working together to bring forward this one world government agenda. And that's what's going to follow World War III, is the one world government agenda. That's what all roads lead to. And so when people talk about a reset, you know, it's still leading to that same place. Even the idea of the dollar going down leads to a one world government or a one world currency. And so these are interesting times. You know, I'd like to get some writing done in my lifetime at least the next few years, and I look at how so much of my life has been spent on YouTube. And, you know, it's the ultimate putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm reaching people at the level that I was 5 years ago. And now when I post something on Facebook and Twitter, hardly anyone even see that I posted. I'll do a test. Does anybody see this? Does anybody see this post? And 1 to 2 people will. In other cases, no one will. So, obviously, there's an element of that that's influencing us on YouTube, but not as bad as it potentially could be, which is concerning about what's going on here. And how about people that can get too close to the truth? They don't kill them, they just render them invisible. And we've seen evidence. That's a longer podcast, but we've seen evidence of this over the years. Tracy Twyman one day on Facebook was posting about references to her were being scrubbed off the internet. And she's written a lot about the occult. She's been on the Clyde Lewis Show, other shows, probably Coast to Coast AM. You can find her website. Met her once briefly in Portland. I think I had her on Outside the Box TV. So she deals with a deeper analysis of the occult throughout history in the books that she's written, not just stuff that she has on her website. There's a big value to books. And as I said previously, we need to be putting the emphasis back on writing, on publishing magazines, on publishing zines. What if that's going to be one of the most valuable things to inform someone about a subject in the future? You know, think about something lightweight or zines on multiple subjects. What could you create? But we could try to back up our videos, and I think there's value in that. Not only back up your channel, but, you know, back up your hard drive. EMP-proof your hard drive. I haven't. But is there value in something like that? Absolutely. Having buried computers. So I'm a little ways off from living that kind of lifestyle. But when it really comes to bugging out, you know, it's difficult to say what the most ideal places are. I think it really depends on your area, your survival skills in that area, your ability to live in that area, or survive that area or that culture or that society. Do you have allies, or are you a loner? These things determine what is a better bug out plan. Whether you head for the hills or an area outside the urban terrain into the suburbs with friends and say the same house. You know, threat analysis is key. So if it's a fire, that's a certain response. If it's an invasion, that's a certain response. If it's protecting yourself from gangs, or specifically protecting the women in your life, that's a specific response. So it's a specific response. If the lights go out, you don't have enough food at home, and there's a bunch of people heading to the grocery store at once, but the grocery store doesn't have power. So people are looting at this point, and some people are doing something that they've never done in their life to survive, thus putting themselves in a bad situation. So we should have at least a few weeks worth of food, if we can afford it. I don't think that I'm at a few months. I think I'm at a few weeks at best. Okay on water. You know, I'm definitely away from it all. But at the same time, I think about the local risks as well, which are just as real to a certain degree as risks that you might face in the city, depending on circumstances. Things are not as they seem when you go off-grid into particular areas where it's high on freedom and low on law. That means things can go in a number of different directions. During a, you know what, hitting the fan situation, things change. And so, you know, a period of peace could be interrupted when the nation is in uproar and there are issues with supplies and people able to get what they are accustomed to getting. You know, one of the things that I think about is that period in which all these people that could be detoxing at once from their fix. Would it be medical marijuana or something pharmaceutical or alcohol or nicotine? You know, when people don't get their fix. So when I think about the future in the 2020s and the effect of the next solar cycle on aggressive human beings, people that hurt others, which is a very large category. So the link between violence, person-on-person violence, assault, all the way up to military invasions, seems to coincide with the solar max cycle. So, and I also think that there is a greater link between the paranormal and spirits that might possess certain humans, so they may go out and commit certain acts of violence, whether in this country or another, defined and called different things based on suspect or country of origin, but violence is violence nonetheless. And so some of us that are really sensitive to energies, especially energies from the sun, so people like myself, for example, we may notice those periods in which the sun is more active and we are feeling it in our body, but we are also seeing the world events. We're seeing things unfold unconsciously, like maybe an increase in fights or an increase in certain things in urban environments. The sun and the increase in that solar energy also results in new ideas and other positive expressions. But for the purpose of this conversation, geopolitics and crime in the city and even sexual assaults, I see a direct linkage, right, with periods of greater solar activity manifesting our world as a geomagnetic storm. And again, we had one last night. It doesn't mean that you or I may necessarily feel dizzy or aggressive when it happens. We may feel nothing. But how do we know that there isn't a force of darkness, the hidden hand, if you will, that isn't manufacturing particular events to occur like clockwork? And so we can also see theories from Burrell Payne that an increase in aggressive behavior could potentially increase geomagnetic storms themselves, which is a little bit beyond what most people are willing to believe. But if you believe in the idea of oneness, that everything is connected, the interconnectedness principle within this quote-unquote holographic reality or simulation, then I would say that is possible. That there could be an outbreak of war, a massive collective thought of fear within the population, maybe fearing world war at the same time. And then, because if we actually look at the events of yesterday, the strikes came on Syria before the geomagnetic storm. Now, again, the sun could have it already released the solar flare in the days prior. And so there already was a warning of a geomagnetic storm 3 days later. So we have the solar flare, and then a few days later, a geomagnetic storm. So those involved in staging events on the ground could stage their event after knowing about the solar flare and its likelihood of causing a geomagnetic storm based on whether or not it's pointed at the Earth and other factors. So once they're able to determine at that higher level of government, of where the dark occult meets technology, it's a lot more to CERN, or a lot more to black op technology than CERN. This is an area that most human beings haven't even looked at, even though we have this phenomena of staged events that are manufactured on a number of different levels, non-natural events, but events to where, it was something that they made happen. And they may have made it happen, like 9/11, in a way different than what they told the human beings on the ground. For example, a staged event to create a certain outcome, like a terrified population that goes, "Government, save us, let's go to war." You see? And 9/11 is one of the best examples of that, which occurred during the peak of that solar cycle, with solar flares happening on that actual day. Geomagnetic storms literally around the period in which the planes hit the towers. Geomagnetic storms being registered. And so there were actually a number of different events, like the planes hitting the towers and the towers falling, by the way, not in the same order, which caused some people to go, "What's that all about?" But another study online correlated the moments in which the towers either fell or were struck with geomagnetic storms down to those minutes. Now, what could be causing something like that if it's being televised? And so some people have their own theories about other forms of weapons being used that cause that spike on the field. Another argument or hypothesis is that's human consciousness affecting the field. What if that's true? What if human consciousness and that vibrational frequency of fear and anxiety caused a flux? So could the energies be looping off of each other? Could the solar flares be affecting mankind and in some causing that increased warlike behavior and aggression? And could that increased human aggression, street fighting on the ground, violent protests, wars, attacks in the street, could that also be affecting as below, so above? Could that be adding to an already angry or active sun? And someone else, could look at this from a higher perspective. Even though there's violence, it's the idea of the sun moving things forward. So it's going to magnify all that's there. It's not the sun is to blame, it's that the sun is an energy conduit for pushing things forward that are already there. And that should make sense. That should make sense. And so we look at the events of yesterday and we see a geomagnetic storm by the end of the day while the world is glued to their TV sets over Syria. With that collective, telepathic, psychological, cognitive energy. And so it's not by accident that in the next few weeks, this is countdown mode to the 24th, that I'm going to be putting my satellite internet on hibernation mode. Pray for me. Pray for the car. Donate if you can. But I'm not even able to get AAA now. But I'm going to be taking a gamble. To save money, I'm going to cut that internet cost. And I guess to save my mind. And I'll be downloading items of news. And I'm assuming that we're going to be seeing a lot of things happen this summer that I'm going to be aiming to report on. And to take the moment and report on the anomaly like no one will, because this is just outside the frame of reference, the idea of manufactured events during solar peaks. And I wrote a blog about it in 2013 at alexansory.tv, and I put together a solar flare presentation and PDF that's at alexansory.tv at the top of the page. And people want to divert to other areas of conversation regarding the sun, but it's at that PDF that I reshared the war cycles of war and peace that were discovered initially by a Russian, Alexander Chavinsky, in 1918, verified by Americans in the United States, people like Edward Dewey and Robert Becker, to be rediscovered by people like Burl Payne and people like myself in the modern day. And this is like a hidden science that today's human that questions reality and looks at the position of the stars, for the most part, they're not looking in this direction. They're looking at one direction and one conspiracy, and they're looking at the astrological reading and what it's going to tell them and what they're interpreting about the beginning of new relationships and the ending of old. And I'm not hearing deep, insightful, helpful information regarding world events and cycles of war and peace from these astrologers. The only person or people that have ever made sense with regards to this are some of the people that I've just mentioned and a few others. Because this is something that has spoken to my soul for a long, long time. And I would even say that my soul is speaking to you about this topic, about the sun. I mean, it's a big, big deal. It's more than a thing that just is going to come up in a few hours and get us outside and bring more vitamin D into our lives. It is something that also excretes, right, solar rain and plasma, solar radiation, and things that have specific biological effects on the human species. War and rumors of war is one of those things. So are periods of increased earthquakes, periods of increased unrest, periods of increased lightning storms in some cases. And also in certain parts of the world, like Texas and other areas, where after a geomagnetic storm, I'll see an increase in some cases in stories about lightning, or I'll witness it. Like when I went to Texas in September 2011, and the solar cycle starting getting more intense, and so did Occupy, and so did the lightning that night, which was, not uncommon for Texas, but intense nonetheless, even for that area that night. And it's like, not everyone's able to pick up on the subtle energies of this reality where everything is connected. But the sun is involved. It's not an accident that people are actually emerging in our midst to say the sun doesn't exist, that solar flares don't exist, that these levels of psychosis exist and are mainstream. You need to ask why. It wasn't so mainstream years ago for people to say, the sky didn't exist and space didn't exist, but now it is. Now they say 1 out of 3, or is it 2 out of 3 millennials are asking if the earth is flat. Once you conditioned a society through pop culture and manipulated Facebook feeds to believe in the absurd, where does it end? Where does it stop being the absurd? So these are some things that I want to bring you, right? I'm not going to be sitting at my laptop looking for the next update. I know that I can have more food. I know that I feel like I'm in a vulnerable position, even though I'm in a better part of the country than, say, somewhere closer to the coastline. But there's only so much that I can do. I got to put faith back in the Creator, keep it there, and in what I'm doing, and move forward with things, without panicking. Like moving into a phase of my life to where I'm less reactive to the world events. Ironically, as the world events get more and more in our face. It's like, I've worked for years to try to warn people about particular scenarios to feel like my warnings have been laughed at and only looked at by a few hundred people. And then to wake up to another reality that not only that is the issue, but to even get too big or to be able to warn the people on a larger scale could potentially bring great blowback from these dangerous governments and their armies. So on that level, that's concerning as well. And I've shared with you other concerns that are not related to this conversation. So where does it end? Well, it's certainly not the end of the things that I'm going to be creating. But full-time, all day on YouTube, something's got to change. So please join the Patreon page, and I'll be able to expand on podcasts there. Please join the on-demand channel for $5.95 per month. That's a very complimentary show of support, and I will continue, despite the free speech threats that we face on this platform.